And you're causing all this destruction just because your candidate lost. See, that's the problem with this country. You can't always get your way. Everybody wants to be politically correct. Quit being crybabies. Ain't nothing free. You ain't no slave. You don't get your way. So you act like a 2-year-old, burning up people's stuff, destroying the streets, making people late for work. Man, I'm glad I don't live in New York City or Washington or Oregon, because I would run one of y'all asses over. You are outrageous, man. You are the exact reason why Donald Trump won the election. Because we're tired of you crybabies. You didn't earn anything. None of you put on a uniform. But you're quick to disrespect the flag. Not want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Not want to recognize the Bible. But you want everything. You didn't fight for anything, but you want it. It doesn't work like that. You know, I think it should be all these people out there that want to protest and burn stuff up. I don't think the cops should protect them. Obviously, when people look at the flag and say, that's not my flag, Donald Trump is not my president, then you know what? Then obviously, this ain't your damn country. Leave. Find another flag. Find another president. Go to Mexico. I really don't care. But quit tearing up stuff. Quit causing destruction and preaching peace. Because you're contradicting yourself. I'm Deion Alexander, American First.
Well, good morning. This is Lou Benninger. And if you survived this week's heat, God bless you. And maybe you're some of the stronger of the species, knowing that you've been taught there's this factor called survival of the fittest. So if you made it to Saturday, June 24th, you are one of the more fit folks. So welcome. If you've never listened to us before, this is Live with Lou, and I'm Lou Benninger, and I have with me Leon Lampkin, who is actually really making this all happen. I'm just talking. He's doing all the hard work, which is all the electronics and technology. So normally we're doing a live show where you can call in. So, and this is if you've lost track since you're not working. This is Saturday the 24th. And if you wanted to call in, today would not be the good day to call. The phones do work, but you'll go to a voicemail because we're actually not in the station on the 24th. We're pre-recording this. This isn't like the Worst of Lou, a collection or compilation of the Worst of Lou, or a reheated version of Lou. This is live. We're recording this new material, but we're just recording it a couple days early because we were having difficulty making it out here on Saturday the 24th. So here we are. If you're awake, it's been hot all week. I'm telling you what. If you believe in a real hell, I think the only thing worse than this is just lighting yourself on fire. So just take off some clothes if you're not working and just lighten things up. Sit in a cold tub. I just sat in a cold tub last night and just pondered, just talked to God and sat in ice cold water. I thought, this is the life right here. Only in America. If you were out in the boondocks and they had this kind of heat, didn't have any like running water and all that kind of stuff, you would be suffering. So welcome to the show. Hope you enjoy it. We got a lot to talk about today. Let's see. Let me get back to my page. I'm supposed to be on here. I'm trying to get all organized. We're doing a little bit different today, so we got a little different plan going. So, I want to talk to you, first of all, about, let me just give you a few, if you're new, we'll give you a little, help you orient yourself to us. We're located in eastern Yuba County on a place called Mount Huth. This is the Patriot Radio, they call it nowadays. It's KMYC 1410 AM, and if you like to listen to FM, you can go to 104.3 if you have some sort of an aversion to AM. If you are out on a fringe area, like we know, someone told me, where were they? They were up, I don't know, Butte County or Placer County or somewhere, and they said, "Oh, I could hear you up here." So I know we hit regions in Sacramento, Placer, Colusa, Butte, Nevada. And so if we're out there and it gets a little scratchy, you can go on your computer to the website KMYCradio.com, KM like in Mickey, KMYCradio.com, and then click on the Listen Live button, and we'll try to check here Saturday morning when we get there to make sure that the live stream is working. Sometimes for some reason, and people have different opinions why, live stream gets a hiccup in it. I'm not intelligent enough to tell you why, but that's just kind of the way things are. So let's see, what else should I tell you to start off to cover all my bases? I think we got it all covered. So we're not going to give out the number today. Well, I'll give it out, and if you want to leave a voicemail, you can talk to the big kahuna and complain or say attaboy, and it's 530-742-5555. I'll give it to you again, 530-742-5555. But again, we're not going to take you live on because we're going to be long gone. Leon and I are going to be long gone, and we're just going to leave our presence on the radio. So I wanted to talk a little bit. Oh, let me mention this. We have a couple sponsors, and that help us make this show possible. And you'll hear some ads on the show today for Greenitz Construction. He's in he works primarily Yuba Sutter area, Yuba Sutter counties, Northern California. But I've known Dave for 40 years. I just don't get people on the air and they pay me money. Actually, we don't really solicit a lot of advertisers, but these guys have helped me be on the air here. And Dave Greenitz is the best remodeler in town if you want to get your kitchen or bathroom looking like something out of, I don't know. It's just unbelievable how nice they look. You can go on his website, greenitzconstruction.com, green with ETZ on the end. So we're here because of him, and we're here because of a guy named Ted Holmes who runs the Plumbing Doctor. And these guys are both in the Yuba Sutter area, and they're just very honest, kind guys, do a great job. And whenever I need anything, when I need to keep those things flowing in the plumbing department, I got Ted Holmes over there with his Plumbing Doctor. And when I have anything fix-it things, I just make a punch list. In fact, I'm headed to Vietnam, and if I have any things to work on, I'll just say, here's the key, go in there and straighten this place out. And we're also brought to you by a new product out called Dr. DJ Trump's Butt Hurt Salve. And you may not have heard of that, but it's a new product since the election called Butt Hurt Salve. And you can get it in 4-ounce cans. DJ Trump calls them huge, Y-U-G-E. It's called Special Formula number 45, and it says it soothes the sting of massive butt hurt resulting from the unexpected defeat and exposure to raw truth. Apply liberally for 8 years. Repeat as needed. So that's Dr. DJ Trump's Butt Hurt Salve. And if you need that, you can probably just Google it and track that down. So there you go. Did you follow the election down in Georgia? It was a fascinating election. It was to replace Tom Price, who was the congressman from that district in Georgia. I can't quote you. I think it's the 26th district, but it really doesn't make any difference. Tom Price was promoted to be a cabinet member by President Trump to be in charge of, he's a doctor, Dr. Tom Price, but he's also a congressman. And so he now is serving in the health Department of Health and is helping try to restructure this Obamacare. But anyway, they had to replace his position, fill his position, and so folks ran from both parties. And there's a young guy named Ossoff, O-S-S-O-F-F, and he ran against a lady named Handel, H-A-N-D-E-L, who actually had held political positions in that state. Ossoff had worked for a legislator, but highly educated young guy, 30 years old. So he became the darling of the left, and they thought, we're going to begin to take Trump apart bone by bone. And so there's been several races since the election of the president, and so Ossoff was one of them, Ossoff versus Handel. And the fascinating thing was that people from the left, from all of the United States, including the majority of them from Hollywood, actors and just dignitaries from the left, began to pour money into Ossoff's campaign, and it became the most highly financed congressional campaign in the history of America. Is that amazing or what? And it became a showdown on whether Trump is still liked as much as he was to get elected. It became kind of a showdown or a face-off or a power encounter from the Democrats' side to try to show that the country really made a mistake and they regret it. So Ossoff, this is what really impressed me. He either spent between 6 or 7 times what Handel spent. I've heard figures of between $24 and $30 million on a congressional seat. That's amazing. So Handel spent, I don't know, somewhere around 4 or 5 million. As you saw, if you saw it, the election turned out that I think Handel beat Ossoff by about 4 percentage points. And that was that. So it reminded me of the election we just had where Barbara LeVake, who had been appointed, she had been a supervisor at one time and then was rejected for a second term by the voters. And then when James Gallagher became assemblyman, he needed to have someone fill his seat on the Board of Supervisors, so he got Governor Brown to appoint Barbara LeVake to that spot, even though many, many other people had applied to be appointed to that spot. So at the request of Al Montna, who is a Republican kind of local power broker in the Yuba Sutter area, he tries to be. So they appoint Barbara LeVake. And so she said, well, I'm just going to serve one term. Then, like most politicians, they decide to serve another term, then another term, and then they can't. Like, did you hear Dianne Feinstein is going to run for election? I think she's in her 80s. Amazing. So when Barbara LeVake announced, and she made it into the front, she was second in the primary, and then was a face-off with Matt Conant in the general election. And normally supervisor races, they'll generate $50,000 per candidate for those that are well-funded, or $50,000 to $70,000 nowadays. There's a lot of money nowadays for small northern counties that are fairly poor. But into Barbara LeVake's campaign, $170,000 came in, the majority of it from outside the county. Now, the Ossoff campaign down in Georgia, they said that he had 7,000 or 8,000 donors from California and about 800 from his district in Georgia, or from Georgia. So kind of interesting how that works, right? So, and that's the way it was with LeVake in this election, this last general election when she lost. And she lost really a lot worse than Ossoff did. Ossoff ran a pretty close race for being a newcomer. LeVake, who'd been around here for years and served in multiple capacities, was soundly rejected by the voters, even though collecting and spending most of $170,000. Can you imagine that? That's an amazing amount of money right there. But there was a similarity there. So anyway, Georgia went to, so all 5 races that have been contested since the Trump election have gone to Republicans, which is fascinating in itself. So I wanted to talk also about the city of Marysville, and I'm going to look. I wrote an article. You can read this in detail. I wrote it for the paper, the Territorial Dispatch, that came out on Tuesday, and let's see, today's Thursday. We're recording this, so this was a couple days ago that the paper actually came out, and the Marysville City Council meets on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday night. And so I wrote an article about the Marysville City Council being at a crossroads, and it's really been struggling for a few decades now. And if you didn't know anything about Marysville and you drove through, it would be a shocking sight. Most yards are not watered. Weeds are growing up all over the place. Potholes in the roads. It's a sign of a sick city, and it isn't really even a legitimate city. It's actually more like a town. 12,000 people, a police department we can't really finance properly. So there was a number of hot topics on the agenda, and I understand, I didn't attend the meeting, but talked to people who did. The council meeting went from 6 o'clock till almost midnight. So Marysville one time had between Marysville and Yuba City, which are the county seats of Marysville's the county seat of Yuba County, Yuba City's the county seat of Sutter County, and they're sister cities with a river between. So years ago, Marysville was by far the largest city with all the big department stores and all the car dealerships. And, they had a big meat packing plant called Cargill. Eventually, all those moved to Yuba City or went out of business. Cargill left the area and remained in other states, but not here. And the car dealerships all moved, and the major department stores have moved. But the fact is that what really has killed Marysville, or what I call Buckeyeville, is the fact that they have made numerous bad decisions. So when you think of your family budget, and everybody's been raised differently and has different philosophies on this, but the Bible teaches an interesting concept about finances, and it encourages people or warns people not to borrow money. And the reason it warns people is that you begin to presume upon the future that you have no control over. And the other thing is that the Bible teaches so clearly that the borrower is always servant to the lender. So you're kind of a servant in the Bible means a slave. So it's a form of bondage, and being in debt is a form of bondage. It really restricts you. It restricts what you can do with your life as an individual. It holds you to a set of routines in life where you have to serve that loan. You have to work to pay that loan down, pay that. You could never decide to just take some time off, take a few months off. You just have to work. So when a city or a county or a government goes into debt, it causes some significant changes in how it's able to operate. It hamstrings, or if you could see yourself as needing both arms, but one arm is in a sling and can't be used, and you're trying to do a two-arm job with one arm, that's what it cripples government, is what it does. So the city of Marysville had an experience where back in about 2006 or 7, the city council at that time chose to invest in some property on B Street that it had no money to invest. So instead of investing some money that it had in a general fund or something, put a down payment, they had to buy this property in a certain way. So they floated bonds, and without going into all the detail, because I think I did it last week and I don't want to spend all day on this, the city ended up $17 million in debt for a piece of property that's worth $1.5 million. Now you think, how did that happen? Well, that happens when people are really stupid. And that's why it's so critical on who you vote into office. Now, if a person down the street starts a restaurant and they're stupid, the the payment, or the cost to you, or the penalty to you, is you try the restaurant once and it's not good food, or the service is crummy, or something, and then that's the only loss you have, unless you're stupid and you go back there time and time again to get bad service, bad food. So in a private enterprise or capitalistic society, if a business doesn't provide good service, that business eventually goes out of business, loses their business, and is no more. In government, they just keep dipping into the pot and going and getting more money to operate. So it's so critical who you vote in, and unfortunately, a lot of the times you don't know much about the people you vote for. But so we've had a series of city councils that have taken the city more and more into debt. Now, recently, the city council chose to keep their police department instead of having the sheriff's department, which is located just across the street. So you have two law enforcement agencies. You can throw a baseball from one and hit the other. And they have duplication of services. Both have a chief, both have a dispatch center, both have detectives, both have crime analysis, both have all the different regiments of officers, etc. So it's redundant. Instead of having one chief and one dispatch center and all those things, and then have just a few more officers to take care of a small portion of the Yuba County 644 square miles, Marysville's about 3.2 or 3.4. The city now has chosen to spend $1 million a square mile, to keep the police department, instead of saving $1 million plus a year going with the sheriff's department. So even though that was brought up, they weren't willing to go to the sheriff and even ask him for a formal proposal. They hid that information from the voters because they didn't want him to have, it's like a car deal, right? And you're selling your car, and a person says, "Oh, I love that car. I'd like that car," but you don't reveal to them, because you're dishonest. You don't reveal to the prospective buyer that you've been having problems with the motor, or the tranny sounds odd, right? And so you hold back information to get the outcome you want. So what the city council and Walter Munchheimer, the county administrator or city administrator's done, is they've withheld information from the voters and the citizens who are going to have to pay the bills, that they could actually get a superior law enforcement department by going with the sheriff's department and save $1 million a year. Now, I want you to, if you live around Marysville, Yuba City, just drive through Marysville and see if you think what's been going on has been working. Now, somehow, no one wants to take responsibility in the city land it. Okay, we're going to take a break right now. We're kind of doing this by the seat of our pants here today. So we'll be right back.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. If I still have time, I might add, Mr. Truitt, that it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
Free speech matters. Diversity matters. diversity of people's backgrounds, but also diversity of thought, diversity of ideas. Universities are meant to be a challenging environment for young people to encounter ideas they've never seen, they've never imagined, and that they might passionately disagree with. If universities become homogenizing institutions that are focused on inculcating and indoctrinating rather than challenging, we will lose what makes universities great. The First Amendment is not about opinions you agree with. It's not about opinions that are right and reasonable. The First Amendment is about opinions that you passionately disagree with and the right of others to express them. It's tragic what is happening at so many American universities, where college administrators and faculties have become complicit in functioning essentially as speech police, deciding what speech is permissible and what speech isn't. You see violent protests that the senior senator from California referred to, enacting effectively a heckler's veto, where violent thugs come in and say, this particular speaker, I disagree with what he or she has to say, and therefore I will threaten physical violence if the speech is allowed to happen. And far too many colleges and universities quietly roll over and say, okay, the threat of violence, we will effectively reward the violent criminals and muzzle the First Amendment. Are there people with noxious ideas in the world? Absolutely. The Nazis are grotesque and repulsive and evil. And under our Constitution, they have a right to speak, and the rest of us have a moral obligation to denounce what they say. The Ku Klux Klan are a bunch of racist, bigoted thugs who have a right to express their views. And we have an obligation then to confront those views, which are weak, poisonous, and wrong, and confront them with truth. We don't need to use brute force to silence them, because truth is far more powerful than force.
All right, you're back, or we're back, and hopefully you're here. And we've been talking about the city of Marysville. And you may not live here. You may be up there in Orville or Chico or Lincoln or Colusa. And the problems in cities, a lot of them are similar. Like, you all have pension problems. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But cities and counties and states and churches and businesses and nonprofits go up and down depending on the quality of leadership they have. So we're talking about a situation where people had a chance to vote folks to take the city of Marysville and to manage it. And they have gone out and maybe done things that they had never done with their own personal funds. Maybe they'd never gone out and they'd go out and borrow. But the council continues to go out and borrow money when we can't pay on the debt that we already owe. So the city police chief convinced the city council that it was a bad idea to go with a better law enforcement agency that would save us $1 million a year, but to stay with a very small and withered agency that and hang with that. So they passed a 1% sales tax increase in June of 2016, which now is in effect. So each year they're taking another $1.5 million out of the citizens of Marysville and anybody passing through to fund what they said was a saving measure. They needed to save police and fire, but as soon as they got the money, like most cities do, is they give raises to everybody. And so they gave everybody a raise. Actually, they gave all the leaders a raise. Some people have said they didn't give everybody a raise, so I'll qualify that. But a lot of people got raises, and they didn't bring that up during the election campaign. And then they said, well, actually, we can't save the police with this tax. We got to borrow another $750,000 to $800,000, $750,000 to $800,000 to buy all new police cars. Now, we've never bought all new police cars to replace a whole fleet in the history of Marysville. But all of a sudden, they come up with this idea, and they're not buying from local car dealers. They're just buying from Ford, the Ford National Corporation. And they're going to lease these vehicles. So they're going to go into debt nearly another $1 million to buy 19 vehicles. Now, I didn't even know that we had 19 vehicles in the police department. So they claim that by doing that, they'll cut down on maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So my suggestion was to a couple city council members, why don't you just purchase with cash 2 or 3 vehicles a year over the next several years and do it that way? So they feel, just like the group that bought this B Street property and went into debt $17 million for a piece of property worth $1.5 million. Now we make payments. I've heard varying figures now, $640,000 a year to $680,000 a year. Now we're going to pay another $175,000 or $74,000 a year for 19 brand new cars. Just amazing. So down, the city of Marysville has chosen to continue to operate exactly the same as they've always operated. It's just more expensive to do. Now, one of the things that they don't talk about much, but they talk about in Yuba County a lot, is the pensions. And Robert Bendorf refers to the pension problem, pension and health costs of employees, as the rising cost of doing business. That's the term he used. He said, we're bringing in more money over at Yuba County, but it's costing us more money to run because of the rising cost of doing business. So that is a euphemism or a trigger word for increased pensions and health costs. So one way, I'm going to talk about this in detail, and I don't talk a lot about it in detail because usually if you talk much about numbers on the radio or things like pensions that most people don't understand how the pension system works, it doesn't make for exciting radio. But I'll tell you what's going to be exciting is when we go bankrupt and when the city can't fix the streets. Like, for instance, I've lived in the city, in the place that I live in now. I've lived in it on and off all my life, but I'm in the place I am now since 1987, and the streets never been treated with oil, paved, repaved, nothing, zero. And I'm hard pressed I can't remember of any of the streets that have been repaired except for the ones Caltrans repaired coming through town recently, because Highway 20 and Highway 70 state highways come through. So what's happening is when they go to make the budget every year, whether it's the city, the county, or whatever, the state, they're running out of money because all the money has been sucked off by politicians making deal with unions to pay their union people egregious, incredibly high amounts of money to retire on, versus if you compared it to the private world, the private work world. And so one way out is that I'll mention it with the city of Marysville. They had an item on the budget because they said we're going to have more money, even though they really don't have more money. They have more money, but they've already spent it. Like, they got a $288,000 fine from the Department of Water Resources because they just simply didn't do their job. But no, in government, when people don't do their job, they promote them or they move them to a different position and give them a fresh start. In the private industry, you'd get fired if you caused the business to lose a third of $1,000,000, right? So there was an item on the budget. They went through this budget line item by line item. Instead of having a budget hearing and inviting anybody that wanted to come to the budget hearing to discuss just the budget, they included that in the city council agenda, and unfortunately they pushed all the public issues to the back, the far end, the end of the meeting, which ended up being after 11 o'clock at night, instead of dealing with it first and leaving all the budget issues to use the rest of the night. It seems like something contrived going on there as well. It's interesting. Politicians complain about the public not caring about their jobs and not coming not caring about the supervisor of city council jobs and not attending the meetings. But then when they do attend the meetings and they raise questions, they get all upset and try to be avoiding answering it, or they're deceptive. And that's what happened here, where the budget was presented at the front and all the other issues, like the issues on the ordinance addressing the marijuana issue, ended up pushed to the back of the meeting, where people had to sit and wait the whole night, not knowing when that issue would going to come forward. So the city of Marysville, also on that agenda, was an item to hire one park worker at a price of about $76,000 a year. Now, there's something built into that other than just, obviously, he's not going to get that much money, or she. But they're paying pensions and health and all insurance, all that other stuff that goes with that, right? So I've been bringing it up for a long time, and it's not originating with me. The information is out there all over the place, is that the way, the fact is that the state is not changing the pension program because they're owned by the unions. They're bought and sold by the unions, these politicians. And so are the counties and the cities. So one way around this, for those who want to change the pension system, is to just quit hiring employees and subcontract all the work of the city out, like they did in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We played that clip last Saturday. And then you, through attrition, when people leave or die off, you just replace them with private contractors. Like, instead of having a parks worker, you hire a landscape maintenance company to do that parks work job. And so when that landscape company, maintenance company, has sickness in their workforce, somebody needs to go out, take a break because their wife had a baby, they get drunk or on drugs, whatever, it's no impact to the city, because they just simply have to get the job done with some worker. And it doesn't matter who it is. They just need to get the job done, and they're not responsible for the city's not responsible for the human resource issues of that particular worker, or the costs, or the pensions, or whether or not he's stealing from the city, or whatever. It's just a real clean way to do it. So I heard that hiring a parks worker actually got tabled. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I didn't hear it firsthand. So the city of Marysville is doing the same thing. I kept asking, when we were being asked to vote for an increase in sales tax, what are we going to do different as a city to not end up broke again? Because when you give a person money who has a tendency to go broke and bankrupt, make bad decisions, as they say, you pour good money after bad. You use good money after bad. In other words, you give money to a person that keeps running his business into the ground, he's probably going to use your money, run it into the ground again. So the city council is operating the city exactly the way they've operated before, continuing to borrow money. Instead of, right now we're going to have 3 top vacant positions in the city. We're going to have the city administrator or the manager, the finance guy, and the community service or public works guy. The 3 main jobs. Could you sub out 2 of them and use, my feeling is you could sub out both finance and public works and go to a 3-day city manager. But if you just want to be stuck in the past and say, this is the way we always done it, this is Marysville, we always had a police department, we always had our own fire department. So it's kind of like comparable, like in Yuba City. Yuba City Fire has 1 chief and 5 stations. Chiefs are expensive. Marysville has 1 chief and 1 station, right? So it costs more to operate little bitty towns. But our city council can't seem to see that, because some of them have never, most of them I don't think have ever been in business and operated a business in their life. So I want to talk to you about I'm just going to go over this pension reform, because Cities are going broke. Did you know that? We played a clip last week about Stockton going broke. Or maybe, is it this week we got? Or I think we played it last week. I think we played it last week. Stockton going broke. One city, Vallejo, went broke. Stockton's going broke. San Bernardino's going broke. So San Diego is a beautiful city, isn't it? You've been down there? I like to go in the San Diego area. It's warm, but it's got the ocean breeze. It's very beautiful. The whole side of the city is on the ocean. You'd think, man, these are beautiful high rises. They lost their major league, their NFL team. They still have their baseball team. It's a beautiful park they have downtown. It's just got some amazing places to visit there. It's a wonderful city, but they're going broke. They've been going broke. And, but a few years ago, they decided they had a change in the city council. In 2005, they were on the brink of bankruptcy, and voters ejected the old guard of the city, and they elected a Republican, a guy named Jerry Sanders, who was the former commander of the San Diego SWAT team. I don't know whether it was sheriff or police. And even though he's a member of the union, the law enforcement union, he eliminated all pension spiking. Now, pension spiking is where a person is offered a different job right before they retire that gets higher pay, and the whole reason they get the job is to get them into a higher pay bracket so they'll get that the rest of their life. And they put a proposition on the ballot called Proposition B, which required all non-police employees hired after July 19, 2012 to receive a funded 401k. That's where you can contribute to it, but that when you take the money out of it, it's not a set it's not a set payout like it is now with CalPERS. So if you're donating into or contributing into your retirement account, you may have a 401k if you're a private individual, you're not in a union. And so what they're saying is they were switching all new employees after 2012 to a 401k where the city would commit to put in a certain amount a year to the 401k, and then when they retire, they get whatever in there, no guarantees of any increase or certain payouts or whatever. So that passed, and then the union sued twice. The union sued, of course, in court to have this overturned, and they lost. So then the people that are union-type people say, well, you know, if you don't pay fantastic pensions while other counties are paying fantastic pensions, no one's going to want to come to work here because the pensions on the 401ks were about 30% less than what they were getting. So there's 17 cities in the San Diego County area, and they were paying a lot more, 30% more. Can you see these guys and gals going to these other cities? But the fact is that didn't happen, and they haven't had a problem filling their police and fire force, even though they went to the 401k plan. Now, I want to give you an idea. Now, this, you know, a lot of you just get up in the morning, have your coffee, eat a couple eggs, go to work, and you don't really think about the finances of the state of California. You just think, hey, the lights are on, the red lights are on, yellow lights on, the green lights on, the coffee works, the water ran out of the shower this morning, the gas station's open, we're good, right? And you don't think of the fact that we're broke in the state of California. So let me just give you a couple figures. I'm not going to bore you with figures, but I think it's important to get this because you may be asked to vote on it, and there'll be a big campaign to propagandize you and lie to you about the pension situation. But the total public employee pension debt, that is what we owe, what we've not, it's what we as taxpayers owe, but not what we agreed to. There's a debt of $2.067 trillion for California. This isn't national. And it's climbing fast. But since 2012, San Diego's debt is shrinking because they changed the way they did it. Now, I want to tell you that for every household in California, not person, this is household, the total pension debt, how much we owe for all state, county, and municipal employees is almost $107,000 for every household in California. That's how huge this number is. That's how stupid this whole thing is. And this isn't some right-wing thing. This is Stanford University's pension tracker. So they're following this pension debacle. And originally, the CalPERS, this is the pension group for the state employees, state, county, and city employees, government employees. They said, we think we'll make 7.5% on all our investments. So this is how much you different cities, counties, and other agencies need to give us each year to cover your employees who are retiring. But the problem is they never made 7.5%. In fact, this last year, they made less than 1%. In fact, they made just over 0.5%. So the entire pension program is in deep trouble. And the people at the state level, because the unions are running the state of California through puppets like Governor Brown, and so since they're not going to deal with this problem, it's up to the cities and the counties and the agencies to wiggle their way out of this agreement. And so there's a great article in the California Political Review which told about the situation with San Diego and how it has been working its way out of this problem. So let me see if I can find this other report. I thought I had it on here. Let me see. Here we go. Now, let me give you some steps. You think, well, how is this ever going to be fixed? We made all these commitments to these people. In other words, each month we're paying for people that have retired, and we're paying for people that are going to retire. For instance, when I worked full-time and was making a lot of money, or making a lot of money compared to now, I paid every month into my own savings account or investments because I knew that eventually I was going to retire and I would maybe collect some Social Security, but that's not enough to live on. So you got to put money aside, right? So that's the whole concept. So when you're in a government situation, there's a negotiation and maybe you pay in a little bit, but then the government ends up negotiating and then they say, well, we'll pay part of you, instead of giving you a raise, we'll pay part of your pension payment. So there's all these convoluted agreements that politicians make. Now, I got involved in an email loop with an interaction between one of the human resources people in Sutter County and the Sutter County Taxpayers Association. They were dialoguing who is going to negotiate with the union for the Sutter County employees. Who's going to do the negotiating on a part of the county? Because the negotiator quit. So they were discussing that, and so I wrote a letter or an email to the lady that was in this discussion who works for Sutter County Human Resources, because she said, hey, everything's cool. We have this person that's going to do the negotiation. So you have a negotiator for the union, and that's the employees, the union employees, and you have a negotiator for the county who employs those folks and is going to be paying those pension amounts. So I wrote this lady, very nice lady, by email. I never met her before, but she was very nice in her email. And I said, can you tell me who's representing the taxpayer? And she wrote back, and it just the question totally confused her. I could tell she kept saying, well, she kept giving me the answer to the wrong question. I kept saying, no, if the taxpayers, she just didn't get the fact that the taxpayers ultimately end up having to pay for this. And I said, who sets in on these negotiations to speak for the taxpayer? And we went back and forth several times, and she referred me to this person and that thought and this law, and she never could answer it And the answer is no one in negotiations for these pensions represents the taxpayer who's going to have to pay for these pensions. It never gets brought before the taxpayer to vote on it or anything. So 5 individuals, supervisors, vote on these contracts, and they have been funded to run for their office by the unions. That's who has all this money, whether it's the teachers union or the employees union or whatever. So the politicians take this money, and then when they run for office and win, then the union comes knocking, saying, you remember, we're the guys who gave you all that money and went door to door and made your flyers and said we endorsed you, and now we're asking for a raise. Now, have you ever met anybody in your life that didn't think they were worth more than they were getting paid at the moment, or that they were smarter than their boss? So what we have is union employees that are they're just human beings like you and me. I didn't ever work for a union. But I've listened to union people talk, firefighters and police primarily. And they always believe, and I'm not putting them down for this, I'm just stating a fact. They always believe they're worth more money. And they deserve more money. That's what they believe. So every year, and if anybody else gets a raise, then they always base their argument on the other guy getting a raise. It doesn't matter who gets the raise. It could be the clerks. It could be Public Works. It could be anybody. Well, they got 3%. So the way the unions work, if anybody anywhere got a raise, well, the L.A. firefighters got a raise. Well, Sacramento got a raise. Citrus Heights got a raise. And so we should get a raise. So I'm going to give you some actual recommendations that a county and city can do to change this up. Because I don't think city council and supervisors can figure this out on their own. So we'll be right back. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the station that's been owned and operated by your friends and neighbors for over 72 years.
The Big 14. 5 in a row. Come on, baby. Let's boogie.
Number 1 then, and number 1 in local talk now.
Hey, this is Live with Lou, broadcasting high atop Mount Hood.
KMYC, 1410 AM, Marysville, Yuba City.
Are you the last person at a party? Do you struggle to know when it's time to leave?
Now, I wish I had flown in from the White House, but I'm just as happy to be here anyway.
Do you offer to wash the dishes, unaware the host just wants you out? Is last call meant specifically for you?
And losing an election is pretty devastating, especially considering who I lost to.
Well, no need to suffer any longer with LingerX. LingerX sends signals to the part of the brain responsible for those embarrassing urges and replaces them with dignity and self-restraint.
I take responsibility for every decision I made.
So stop living in the past and move the hell on with LingerX. Side effects include delusional self-comparisons to female superheroes.
All right, welcome back. This is Lou Benninger. You're listening to Live with Lou. I'm here with Leon today, and we're into our second hour. We're happy that you're here. And we've been talking about California pensions. And if you know some people working for city, state, county, government, federal government, or even some of the agencies around that are on the pension programs, or all of us know teachers, they're on the CalSTRS, that's a state pension program. These pension programs are broken. They're horribly managed. Government doesn't manage anything well. So these, instead of taking billions of dollars and investing them and earning a good amount, they've been investing in getting back about 0.5% a year. Right, this last year's 0.61%. That's just over 0.5% instead of 7% they predicted. So what's happening is that we've made all these fantastic promises that if you worked for 20 years or 30 years, you could actually earn, depending on each situation, 100, 150, up to 200,000, maybe even more a year as a retirement, where you're not working and you've already paid for your kids to go to school and you've already bought your house. But just like I said before the break, don't we all feel like we deserve a little bit more money? Or it doesn't matter that you're not going to spend that much money anymore. You still deserve it because, by God, you earned it. You worked all that time. And so it doesn't matter whether it's a burden you're a burden on the taxpayers. That's what you were promised, whether people are stupid or not, and you get it. Like some of these judges get $160,000 a year in health benefits. Are they worth it for the rest of their life? I say absolutely not. And I know a lot of public employees. They're friends of mine. I go to church with some. Some I don't, but I know a lot of them, and some of them I know. They work their rears off, and I'm happy to have them there because I feel like, hey, I'm getting my money's worth. And in other words, they're doing a great job, whether in law enforcement or fire or whatever, or district attorney's office or auditor controller, whatever. But are they worth all the money that's being paid to them? No, not really. How do you establish worth? Well, you kind of establish it like, well, what is everybody earning in the private sector? And should we say, okay, well, we need some people to work for us as we're working in the private sector to protect us, like cops, and knock down fires like firefighters. But should they get paid 2 times what we get in the private sector and get pensions that are 2 and 3 and 4 times what we get in the private sector? That's unfair. So the question is, what is fair? And then now that we have a system that unions have crowbarred into existence through payoffs, corrupt payoffs of politicians, how do we get out of it? So this guy named Eber, E-B-E-R, came up with some ideas. They're not all his original. They're out there, these ideas. In other words, start getting much tougher in negotiation with unions. And the supervisors are always fearful of this because they'll say, the unions always use this argument. Well, your employees will just go to the next county over and work over there. So they think, oh, my God, nobody will want to work for Sutter County or Yuba City. You know, the fact is somebody's going to come and work, and then they're not necessarily a worse worker. And so this goes for everybody from civil service workers to teachers to firefighters to police. Now, it's interesting that both Yuba City Unified and Marysville Unified districts both gave their teachers another raise. Teachers get paid a lot. I know some of you think they don't get paid nearly enough. Well, some people think, oh, we ought to give teachers $1 million a year because they shape our kids' lives. So anyway, this guy says, it must be made clear that we value your service, but just can't pay for all of what you are presently receiving. We just can't. In other words, what do you want us to do? Just go broke and say, oh, well, sorry, we can't pay you. Like, you know, we can't continue paying your pension. Number 2, if public employees want to keep their present benefits, they must contribute the extra dollars to make up what is owed to CalPERS or CalSTRS, no matter how high the cost may be. In other words, they're going to have to step up and get more skin in the game. And they think, well, that's not what we were promised. Well, you know, hey, life doesn't, you know, you kind of make your plans and then things, you just have to deal with it, right? You just have to deal with life as it unpacks. The fact is that the pension burden cannot be sustained by all taxpayers. Or what did I say, $160,000 per household right now, the pension debt? So we need to end pension spiking completely. Like recently, a few months ago, the city council of Marysville were so in love with Walter Munchheimer that they gave him a raise. And just in a matter of 3 or 4 months, he quit. And now he takes his raise, which is spiked, and he says, now I'm going to retire. Well, that's interesting. Why? That's what spiking is. So now he retires at this higher wage, even though he only worked at it 3 or 4 or 5 months. So this ending pension spiking can be taken care of by calculating pensions on base pay. Do you know that if firefighters and cops and others that have the availability to serve overtime, that overtime becomes a part of the amount that the pension is based upon. If we go back to just saying, hey, we're just going to pay you pensions based upon your base pay, And overtime, hey, that blessed you when you got it, but we're not going to roll that over into pensions. We can't afford to. Then the next suggestion is to limit the amount of pensions that can be received to no more than 1.5% per year. In other words, some of these, I think Highway Patrol was retiring after 30 years at what they call 3%. That's, you take 30 years of their salary. You take whatever salary after 30 years, and then they get 3%. To go 3 times 30, they get 90% of whatever they were getting. And so what they're saying here is to go back to 1.5%, because a lot of employees get over 2%. So I have a clip here I want to play. I have some other recommendations, but I want to put this clip in here. And I was mentioning earlier that one of the ways that we can cut back on the pensions is to cut what government actually does and quit hiring people and let the private sector do it. And so this is a concept of privatizing our roads. So here we go.
People say roads are obviously a job for government. And government did build the interstate highway system, and overwhelmingly it is government that maintains our roads. But as you all know, government doesn't do anything well. In my book, Myths, Lies, and Downright Stupidity, I offered readers $1,000 if they could come up with one thing that government does better than the private sector. I'm yet to pay, still waiting. It's not that there aren't things most Americans want government to do, like fight wars and enforce contracts, but in terms of efficiency, the private sector is always better. And that goes for roads, too. People say only government can build and maintain roads, but that's not true. Increasingly, private road builders are building roads and doing it better than government. They built this double-decker underground highway in Paris.
It will now take them 10 minutes for a journey that used to take 45 minutes.
Private operators have more of an incentive to keep traffic moving. The more cars that go through this tunnel, the more money they make. So they clear accidents quickly and find them quickly thanks to 350 cameras they installed inside the tunnel.
Any incident is detected in less than 10 seconds.
They rush to tow the obstacle away. Traffic keeps moving. In California, instead of building a brand new road, a private company added 2 lanes in the middle of Highway 91. Drivers can use them or not, but if you pay, you get to go this fast. You don't even have to slow down for tolls because they installed improved electronic toll collectors. Those are just a couple examples. After the success of Highway 91, other states started leasing their highways to private companies. We're joined now by one governor who did that, Mitch Daniels of Indiana. So, Governor Daniels, the Indiana toll system somehow was losing money?
That's right, John, it did, and pretty consistently so.
How can you lose money on a toll? How can you lose money on a toll road?
Well, if government runs it, there's a good chance it won't be run well, and they found a way. They had no incentive as a monopoly to treat their customers well or to be efficient about what they did. Again, we found a better way.
And as part of the better way, this was a political controversy. You said, I want to lease this to this foreign company, and you took heat from that. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette said there was a backlash against privatization. Somebody said Indiana should run itself, and people didn't like this at first.
You have to remember that we were really trying to solve another and much larger problem than a bad toll road. We had several $1 billion worth of needs to build new roads and bridges, infrastructure, the kind that creates jobs in a modern economy, and no way to get the money to do that. So the lease of our toll road, which brought us $4 billion of money, no taxes and no borrowing, cold hard cash to be reinvested in our state's future, that really was a means to an end. Now, we got a lot better toll road out of the deal.
How did you get a lot better toll road?
Oh, yes, because in addition to the $4 billion cash the state got, the lease commits the operators to invest another $4+ billion in the road over time. Already we have automatic or electronic tolling. We have more lanes. They bought us a new police post and 25 more state troopers. So we have the safest, freest flowing, best operated road we've ever had.
And they did all kinds of things that the government hadn't done. They have some other kind of de-icer that's cheaper and works better. They have computerized snow plows that use less salt. Why couldn't the government do that?
Oh, in theory they could have, but in 50 years they didn't. Again, government's a monopoly, and we know how monopolies tend to mistreat their customers, having no incentive or no competition to do better. John, the operation that we have can best be thought of as a highly regulated utility. We have a couple hundred pages of obligations, which we tightly supervise to make sure that the road is better run than it ever was before. But really, the main insurance policy we have that the toll road stays better is the fact that if they run a lousy road, people will find a reason not to use it and they'll lose money.
And yet, politicians often sneer at this idea of privatization. I once played tennis with an official from the Massachusetts Transportation Authority, and I had done this research. I was excited about these private roads, and I brought it up and asked if he was considering it, and he said, "Oh, that's this right-wing idea. The Mass Pike, I think we'll keep it." Such arrogance.
It's very disappointing that folks of different persuasion would rather have the political power over the money than to work in a public-private way to solve this big problem.
We're joined now by Randall O'Toole, who studied transportation for 20 years. He's the author of Gridlock, Why We're Stuck in Traffic and What to Do About It. And Randall, you're saying that if we privatize more, we'll be less stuck in traffic?
Well, absolutely. When you fly an airplane, the airlines know that certain days of the week, certain times of the year, there are more people who want to go, so they charge more during those times, and they charge less during other times so they can fill up their planes all the time.
Well, that brings up something that Highway 91 did. They have congestion pricing. The toll changes based on whether it's rush hour or not.
That's right, and private entities will have more of an incentive to do this than public agencies. And so we'll get less congestion.
Why do they have more of an incentive?
Well, because they know their money is coming from the users. They know that they need to provide a quality product to the users. In Highway 91, if it gets congested, they're committed to giving people refunds. So they're charging to get you through without having to deal with congestion. They're charging to save you time.
All right, so I'm sure that rocked a lot of your worlds, listening to Privatize Your Roads. But the fact is, as you listen there was a guy named Mitch Daniels from the state of Indiana there that was the budget manager for President George Bush. And he was actually recruited to run for president during the campaign that Trump was elected in, but refused to do that. But he's really turned Indiana's government around by taking it and straightening it out and getting it in the black as opposed to in the red. So I've been talking about, for a few minutes here, about ways to cut the pension debt, which we're going to go broke. All of us are. Doesn't matter which county, we're going broke. And the next suggestion is increase the age for when retirees can receive pensions to at least 55. In other words, you say you're either going to go 55 or nothing. This would assist in reducing the pension costs caused by recipients living to older ages. In other words, people are living to be 80, right? So that if you retire at 55, say you retire at 50, you become a highway patrol officer at 20, you retire after 30 years at 50, and you live another 30 years, you're going to pay that highway patrol officer, just say round figures, $100,000 a year for 30 years. A lot of money. So they're not saying highway patrol officers aren't valuable. They're not saying highway patrol officers shouldn't get a pension. They're not saying highway patrol officers shouldn't retire. They're saying we can't afford to do what we agreed to do under Gray Davis. And I'm going to tell you what happened under Gray Davis, which is shocking. Gray Davis was if you're new to California, he was a governor. You have Brown and Brown's been on for 2 terms. Then you go back to Schwarzenegger, and then you go to Davis. So the next suggestion is to reduce the size of the pensions to a set amount not to exceed $100,000. Lots of people, like Carl Adams, retired. He was getting he retired or resigned, however you want to say it, but in disgrace. Carl Adams was the district attorney of Sutter County before he got accused of possibly lighting a house on fire of his gal he was having relations with, a prostitute. And so he was getting $167,000 a year, and he retired. I've read different amounts of $140,000, $130,000, $150,000 a year. So this would reduce the size of pensions to a set amount not to exceed $100,000 a year. Next, eliminate all double dipping. Now, have you met I've met lots of government employees that are on their second and third career and collecting pensions on all of them. So this would eliminate all double dipping, where retired employees can start a new pension program. This particularly is used in law enforcement and firefighters who retire after 20 years, and then they go get another job with a government agency. So, like, I remember one guy that was the chief of Oceanside Police Department. He retired from there, and then he became the chief of Reno, Nevada, and jumped out of the CalPERS system, went over to and served and retired for a second round in Reno, Nevada. The next one would be to reduce medical benefits and even eliminate medical benefits for pensions that exceed amounts where there's plenty of income to pay for those. In other words, if people are making at the top end of the pensions, just say, hey, you pay for your own medical benefits. Buy your own insurance policy. We're not going to do medical benefits and your pension. The next thing is to change pensions altogether from CalPERS model to a 401k system. CalPERS model is you're paying in a certain amount, but at the end, when you retire, you're guaranteed, no matter what happens in the state of California, in the country, whether all the investments are tanked and we go into recession, you're going to get your money no matter what, even if the city goes bankrupt. This would be instead of a defined benefit, in other words, how much you get, it's going to be a defined contribution, and that's what a 401k system is, and that's what a lot of them are going to now. Finally, if public employees are unwilling to make these sacrifices, we can just lay them off, right? You can just say, we just can't afford to have as many employees as we have, and you can replace with new workers. That's essentially what President Reagan did when the air traffic controllers struck throughout the United States, and they were in negotiations, and they said, we're done. You either give us what we want or we're going to go on strike. And he said, if you go on strike, I'm going to replace you. And they replaced them all that did not stay at their job. So, this needs to be resolved. I don't think it's going to be resolved at the state level. I think you're going to have to handle it at the city, county, and agency level. And there are lots of great ideas out there. Some cities, San Diego is the one city in California that's now tackled it and switching over. And for the first time, instead of going deeper into debt, they're actually getting out of debt. And the cool thing is that a police officer who is a benefit of union negotiations was the one who led them out of disaster. So we're going to come back here in a minute. And, we got a few seconds yet? Okay, we got 30 seconds. We're kind of timing this today different than when we do it live, because we're going to slide in all the commercials and all the other stuff after we do the hard work, which is all the talking. So I think I'll shift gears. That's what we want to do on pensions. And we'll come back here in a minute after we take a break and catch another hour.
I know what a criminal looks like, and an undocumented immigrant is not a criminal.
triple homicide of Anthony Bologna and his 2 sons. Edwin Ramos, a Salvadoran native who benefited from San Francisco's sanctuary policy, is charged with the crime.
Do you know who stopped him from being deported? It was Kamala Harris.
Undocumented immigrants that are the least likely to commit crime.
32-year-old Kate Steinley died after being shot.
Mexican national Francisco Sanchez is a convicted felon who'd been deported 5 times before.
Least likely to commit crime.
Victor Ramirez, an undocumented immigrant, was arrested last year. Immigration officials say they asked to be notified when he would be released.
Days later, police say Ramirez broke into this home and raped and beat Marilyn Ferris with a claw hammer.
All right, welcome back. This is Lou Benninger. You're listening to Live with Lou, and we were talking last half hour about the pensions and what we're going to do about them. And I don't know what your city is going to do, Oroville. I just read where Chico and Oroville have great pension debt. Actually, I don't even need to guess. Every city in this state has horrible pension debt. The fascinating thing is that unions worked out a way where, like, you know how when you go to get a loan, personal loan, and they ask you to list your assets and your liabilities, your expenses, your payments, and you have to list them, and then you sign a document. I think you have to sign a document saying you're honest, you're being honest, all of them are there. And the unions pulled off this thing legislatively up until about a year or two ago, that when a government agency did their budget, they could balance their budget and show a balanced budget without including their pension debt. So it was totally deceptive. It'd be like going into getting a car and they say, well, you know, we want to approve this. We'd like to approve this car loan, but how many payments do you have? And then you leave off your house payment, right? And you're deceptive. That's how the government was being deceptive with pensions. And so finally, I don't know whether it was a court decision or the legislature came up that with the honesty to say you have to include all liabilities in your budget, all the bills that you have to pay. You have to include them in your budget to show the public in a transparent, in the spirit of transparency, where things are financially. And the fact is that every single county, when they say, oh, we have a good budget, we have a balanced budget, really, none of them are balancing right because they're buried with debt. And what's happening is every year they're having to come out of their pocket. What I mean by that is they're taking money out of the general fund that should be fixing potholes and ditches and culverts and drainage systems and lighting and parks and painting buildings and repairing buildings. They're paying that money into pensions and letting things fall apart. Now, that's why cities after city, unless you have a city that's just jacked up with money like Silicon Valley, over in Palo Alto area, etc. But most cities in California are toasted by this type of operation. So the interesting thing to me in California, when I was on the university campus, Cal State University, Sacramento, and looking back on those is how much the professors benefited and all these liberals benefit in their businesses, or Hollywood or these big corporations benefit by capitalism and what we call free enterprise, although it's not entirely free. It's free-regulated enterprise, although the government doesn't own it like in a full-blown socialist or communist country where they own your business and they just let you manage it. So it's fascinating how people make millions and millions of dollars living in a capitalist economy and then constantly rail on it and complain about it and tell everybody how we need a socialist economy. And guys like Sean Penn, the actor who flies down when Hugo Chavez was the president of Venezuela, and he was bragging and flaunting the fact of socialism, and Sean Penn was all in love with Hugo Chavez. And yet Sean Penn has multi-millions of dollars because, I mean, he could have been a good actor in Venezuela and not made any money. But he's a good actor in an economy that's capitalistic, and they rewarded him handsomely with money. But they're the very ones that want to destroy the goose that laid the golden egg. Now, I want to play you a clip called Why You Really Love Capitalism and You Really Hate Socialism, although some of you probably think just the opposite. Here we go.
You love capitalism. Really, you do. And you can't stand big government. Really, you can't. Don't believe me? Then I'll just have to prove it to you. Do you use an iPhone, Android, MacBook, PC? Read on a Kindle? Watch TV and movies on Netflix? Videos on YouTube? Shop on Amazon? Listen to Spotify? Search on Google? Send money on Venmo? Grab a ride with Uber? Drive with Waze? Book a room with Airbnb? Are you on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat? You probably use many, if not all of these things. And if you're like me, you love them. In today's world, they're practically necessities. Where do you think they came from? From entrepreneurs with great ideas and the freedom to test them in the marketplace. That is what is known as capitalism. Now consider some other things you probably use. Have you been to the DMV? Gone through airport security? Mailed a package at the post office? Called the IRS customer service line? Or called any government office for that matter? What's different? Why is going to the Apple Store so fun, but going to the DMV so painful? Because one has nothing to do with government, and one is the government. One needs to satisfy its customers to survive and grow. One doesn't. The purpose of government is not to create products, and we don't expect it to. But if you thought about it for a few moments, you'd realize you don't want the government involved in just about anything private business can do. That's because profit-motivated individuals have to work to please their customers. You, government agencies, don't have to please anyone. Call that IRS service line if you doubt me. Can you imagine if Steve Jobs had to seek government approval for every new design of the iPhone? We'd have been lucky to get to the iPhone 3G. Look at Uber. Just a few years ago, summoning a private driver in a few minutes who would take you where you wanted to go was truly a service available only to the wealthiest people. But now, thanks to capitalism, private rides are an affordable option for ordinary people all over the world. Until Uber came around, if it started to rain in, say, Manhattan, and you wanted to grab a cab, good luck. Too many rain-drenched people and too few cabs. Uber had a better idea. Rain falls, demand for rides spikes. Raise prices to incentivize more Uber drivers to hit the road. Ride in the rain problem solved. Airbnb is another example. Only a few years ago, if you were going on vacation with your friends or family, hotels were just about your only option. But hotels are expensive and often don't provide all that much in terms of space, amenities, or interesting neighborhoods. If you wanted to, say, find out if individual homeowners were making their homes or apartments available for a few nights, you'd have to scour internet postings. But then Airbnb came along, giving anyone with a computer or smartphone access to over 2 million homes in 190 countries. You can find places with hot tubs and pools, or if you're on a tighter budget, you can rent a room, or even just a couch. Government never could have done this. What motivation would it have? How would it even know we wanted services like Uber or Airbnb? We didn't know it until risk-taking entrepreneurs made it possible. Thanks to capitalism. And no thanks to government, which more often than not just gets in the way. Why? Because the government's knee-jerk reaction is to regulate and control everything it can regulate and control. Otherwise, what would be the purpose of many government agencies and all those bureaucrats? Cities across the world are putting up barriers to slow down or shut down services like Uber and Airbnb. Rulemaking may be the only area where the government shows creativity. Economic growth has the best chance of happening in the absence of that rulemaking. As economist Adam Thayer explains, the internet, to use just one important example, was able to develop in a regulatory climate that embraced what he calls permissionless innovation. This approach to regulating allows entrepreneurs to meet their customers' needs without first seeking government approval. In sum, almost everything you enjoy using is a product of capitalism. Almost everything you can't stand is a product of big government. So do you love capitalism? Of course you do. You practice it every day. It's time to preach it. I'm Jared Meyer of the Manhattan Institute for Prager University.
Well, I hope you like that. I think it's a mind blower. I think that's a Prager Institute or Prager University clip, and I love that because there's this disconnect. None of these college students seem to ask how these university professors earn $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 and they don't even work a full 8 hours a day. And you go to Venezuela, or you go to China, or you go to Laos or Vietnam, and they're working for crumbs. If you go to Vietnam, I'll give you an example. Vietnam is a communist economy. They're experimenting with free enterprise. And you work as a bellhop, you may make $150 a month plus tips. Tips might amount to about $2 a day, which is enough to maybe pick you up some breakfast because things are less expensive there. So just something to think about. It's just fascinating when you hear these people telling about the lofty ideals and wonders of communism or socialism. Bernie Sanders is a great example. Bernie Sanders I don't even know that anybody can quote a job he's had. He's made money off the capitalist system, just raking it in by having connections. And I'll give you an example. This is an amazing thing to me, what's happening in our country. We're doing a solar project to get out of these electricity bills out at the Church of Glad Tidings where I attend. I used to work there for, almost 30 years. I still work with them and very close to the operation there, but I'm not on staff. But the utility bill is phenomenal out there. So a guy that's a solar genius got a hold of us and wanted to help us put in our own solar system, which we're doing on our own. So because they're working on days that I can't work out there, I feel bad about it, like on Saturdays when I'm here at the station and then Wednesdays as well. So I thought, I'm just going to pay some people that need some work and send them in my place. So this Wednesday, it was a staff work day at Glad Tidings to work on the solar field. They're putting all these panels up. And so I had 3 people in mind that I asked, all three of them needed money. And all 3 of them didn't follow through, and none of them came to work, even though I was going to pay them all very well to go work in my place. Now, all 3 of them are eating every day. None of them were like skin and bones, as they say. They're all eating every day. They're living in houses, and they're getting by. Now, that's a capitalist country. Now, if you go to Vietnam and you take that approach, you will end up starving to death because it isn't a capitalist country, and you will run out of food and everything else. And you don't want to go to their prisons. That even gets more gnarly. So it's interesting how I hope you get the point of it's so easy to criticize the phenomenon that goes on in the United States with all the things that need to be fixed. But I'm telling you, a lot of Americans need to travel and get outside the United States and go look at what's going on elsewhere. Because once the infrastructure and the philosophy breaks down, you're not going to get it back. And stuff falls apart. And pretty soon, like in Venezuela, I'll give you an example. In Venezuela a few years ago, a good friend of mine went down there to teach a class. And when he was down there, a lot of them were young students. And it was a class about Christianity, right? And these were all Christian folks. And so 2 of the students at the university, they got interested in what I do in China, and they wanted to go to China and Vietnam with me. So we were negotiating how we were going to connect, like where they're going to fly out of Venezuela and they're going to meet me in Hong Kong or they're going to come to San Francisco and we're going to fly together. We're figuring all that out. Well, as we're discussing, anyway, when my friend came back from teaching, he says, Lou, you wouldn't believe Venezuela. I said, yeah, what's up with Venezuela? Because Chavez had died by then, and they had Maduro. And he says, Lou, there's people lined up getting into grocery stores because there's no food on the shelves. I thought, Venezuela, that's amazing, because Venezuela was the strongest economy for years, the strongest economy in South America. So he said, yeah, they're having a major problem down there. Well, these two young people in their 20s called me, or we communicated on Skype. And they said, we want to go with you overseas. And I said, well, why don't we'll meet in Hong Kong, get a ticket, and I'll meet you in Hong Kong. And they said, well, we'll have to go to Colombia. We can't get a ticket in Brazil. And I said, Venezuela. And I said, why can't you get a ticket there? He said, because the government, you buy the ticket for the airlines through the government. It's a socialist country. And many people are giving the money to the government, and then they're not buying the ticket, and then they just put them off. So we have to travel to the next country to buy our ticket. So I said, okay. They said, we'll do that, no problem. Well, anyway, they ended up not going. But that was the telltale sign for me when there was a breakdown in the airline industry because the government was stealing money from the people. Now, recently, I just heard the other day that major airlines are now no longer flying into to Venezuela because the reason is they can't fill up their planes because the government steals the money from the people. Now, this was a capitalistic country at one time that was very successful. People made a lot of money. They had doctors, they had lawyers, they had all the professionals that you would want in any society to take care of the people, right? And through socialism, it has been a complete collapse. And many of the people that can leave are leaving the country. They're just fleeing the country. You only live once. Life goes by pretty fast. To wait for the country to come back again, you're not probably going to be able to wait long enough. It's just like city of Marysville. I'm probably not going to see the city of Marysville ever be healthy in my lifetime. But I own a house there. I've got it paid for. So for me at my age to move doesn't seem right? And unless it just gets really crazy, and then I'll move, no problem, because there's lots of other opportunities. But in Venezuela, people are fleeing the country. The average person in Venezuela has lost 19 pounds because they just don't have an opportunity to eat as much as they used to. It's bad. There are people getting killed in riots there now. But I'm just making a point that a lot of people take what's going on, the phenomenon, the culture of business, and how the culture of trade and business, and how things are transacted in this country, where you give your money to somebody and you trust them that they're going to do the work for you. Right? There's trust. And if there wasn't trust, you would have, like I was in Uganda right after Idi Amin was overthrown, and if you want, everything had broken down. The roads had big holes in them from artillery shells. There was very little telephone. It was difficult to get a fax out when that was high-tech faxes. But if you wanted to reconnect telephone lines to your house, you had to go to the telephone company, and you actually had to purchase the spool of wire to run from the pole to your property, and then you had to pay them to do that, and sometimes they would just take the money and not do it. Now that's a full breakdown in the infrastructure of a society. I've been in Tijuana working in construction in the 1980s, working on an orphanage. When at points in the day, the water would just shut off in the city of Tijuana. I want you to just think about that. Multi-millions of people, and so we were pouring concrete, and it was hot, and you couldn't take a shower. You'd have to save water dripping out of the pipes in a 5-gallon bucket and shower up. I'm just telling you, you take for granted that things function harmoniously here, and you just think it's always going to be that. You can walk into Rayleigh's, Bel Air, Food Max, Winco, and the stores are jammed with food. All that would take, there's one thing that would take to change that and completely collapse, and that would be the government of the state of California saying, we're going to take charge of food. Do you know in Venezuela right now that there's a department that takes charge of all food, where it's produced, how it gets from a wheat field to flour to bread to deliveries? It's all centrally managed. It never has worked in society. Never, not once. So there you have it. So I hope you enjoyed the clip. I spent a little bit more time than I hoped to on the, but I think it's very important, and it's most people that push socialism are incredible hypocrites because they live under the most wealthy country that's ever been in existence, serving the most amount of, there's been wealthy countries, but with not this kind of population of 320 or 30 million people. Hey, I wanted to bring up Tim Tebow today. Tim Tebow, that poor guy, he is a walking target for every idiot in the country. Do you remember when he got 2 Heisman trophies, right, playing for Florida? And then he tried out in the NFL, and he just didn't make it. But people couldn't wait to throw a tomato at him and criticize him. So first of all, they mocked his love for God, and people thought that he was like them. They're hypocrites, so he's a hypocrite. So if he put John 3:16 under his eyes, or he prayed, or he did this or he did that, they just mocked. Now, they won't mock Kaepernick, but Tim Tebow, who played a couple of years for the NFL, tried different teams and didn't work out. So now I brought up here a week ago or so ago, he went to play some baseball. I didn't even know the guy could play baseball, but a lot of these good athletes have played multiple sports, and they just chose the particular sport they would try and made a go of it. So he's now playing minor league single A baseball, and he is packing the stadiums out. Now, he's not doing anything like, basically it's just people want to see who Tim Tebow is, so they come out to these minor league parks. And I'm sure if Tim Tebow played for the Gold Sox or the Yuba City Bears, people want to see Tim Tebow and meet him, maybe. But it just pisses people off. They hate it. That people just hate Tim Tebow. They love to hate Tim Tebow. Has he ever done anything wrong? Has he ever raped anybody? Gave anybody a venereal disease? A venereal disease? Has he ever robbed anybody? Beat up his girlfriend? Has he ever stolen anything? Has he ever lied about things? Not really. He gets mocked for praying for people, for creating proms for special needs kids, going to a prom with a Down syndrome girl. He gets mocked for all that, admitting that he's waiting for marriage to have his first sexual experience. Of course, unless you've just had a number of STDs and had orgies, you're just not normal. You're not considered normal in America nowadays, or experimented with being a transsexual, etc. So now he goes and he's going to play for his team. I think they're called the Fireflies or some ridiculous name. But he goes to play for the Charleston River Dogs, and general manager Dave Eccles, who's got I looked him up on the internet when I heard this. He's a very successful, accomplished promoter of baseball in the minor leagues. But he mocked Tebow. Yeah, Tebow is with the Columbia Fireflies, and they're playing the Charleston River Dogs. I love that name, River Dogs. So when he gets there, they have their mascot with blacked out under their eyes, which I thought was cool, and they put John 3:16. So they kind of mocked Tebow with the mascot, because Tebow one time did that under his own eyes. But then what they did is, I guess they show up on an electronic scoreboard the picture of the player, and instead of putting the name of the player that was up to bat, they would put "not Tim Tebow" to mock him, the fact that people love him and just they think Tim Tebow's a cool guy. There's one part of the country that does, there's another part that hates him, right? And so every player, instead of putting their name up, they put "not Tim Tebow." Then when he came up to bat, you know how they announce the player when they come up to bat? and sometimes they'll play a little background music or something. They would play the Hallelujah chorus when he came up to bat. They'd play that over the loudspeaker. Now, Dave Eccles, the general manager and current jerk of minor league baseball, thought that was cute. And I don't know whether somebody took him to church one time and he had a bad experience, or maybe he had a daddy that beat him too much or molested him. But obviously he's got some kind of axe to grind with a guy that probably he's never even met before. And so the backlash after the here you're sitting in the stadium and maybe you're a River Dogs fan, but thought, oh, Tim Tebow's going to be there. I'm going to go tonight and check out Tebow, and seeing how, I mean, we're talking about Southern hospitality. I don't know whether you've ever been in the South, but that's a real thing. I've traveled in the South, and people are different down there, and I mean in a good way. They're very kind, and I could see people being offended by this stupid Dave Eccles mocking a guy that didn't do anything wrong. He's just playing baseball. He's not saying he's something else. He's just trying to make a team and play well. And he's had people say that he should never be allowed to make it to the big leagues because he hasn't paid his dues. You know, people say stupid stuff. It's just like amazing. Time to change. My director here says it's time to take a break. So I'll finish this on the backside of this commercials. Don't go away, or maybe you just get a cup of coffee, iced coffee today. That would be. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the station that's been owned and operated by your friends and neighbors for over 72 years.
Big 14. 5 in a row. Come on, baby. Let's boogie.
Number one then, and number one in local talk now.
Hey, this is Live with Lou, broadcasting high atop Mount Hood.
KMYC, 1410 AM, Marysville, Yuba City.
Listen to the police when you get pulled over, you will not die. If you listen, you will live, and I got proof. I have saved all my tickets from getting pulled over throughout my lifetime, okay? And guess what? I'm still alive because I listen. Terrence going 30 on a 40. I'm alive because I listen. Terrence going 60 on a 55. I'm alive because I listen. Terrence going 90 on a 70. I'm alive because I listen. And you know what? I was pretty ghetto when I was a kid. I was a teenager, and Terrence got pulled over for having excessive noise with loud music. You know I'm alive because I listen. I listen every time I get pulled over. That's why I'm alive. That's why I'm not dead after getting pulled over with all these tickets. That's why I'm alive. Simple as that. Just listen to the police. Hey,
Come on. All right, welcome back. This is Lou Benninger. You're listening to Live with Lou, and we're talking about, let me just talk about our sponsor once again. Today we're sponsored by Dr. DJ Trump's Butt Hurt Salve. Special formula number 45. Says it soothes the sting of massing butt hurt resulting from unexpected defeat and exposure to raw truth. Says go ahead and apply it liberally. Butt hurt salve. So a lot of you liberals out there, that's what you get a copy of, or a can of. Looks like it comes in a little can like Skoal. And you can just hook it up and try some of that. If you're having a hard time, you can just hook that up. So I was talking about Tim Tebow before we took a break, and isn't it amazing to you when you look at people that are on the left, how hateful they are? And when I think of people that haven't hurt anybody, they're just good people. In fact, I'll tell you what I like about this Tebow. I really like the fact that he does these proms or these dances or stuff, and the only people that get to go to them are people that have special needs, and they They dress up and get it on, and he's pulled those off simultaneously all over the United States and does cool things like that. And I just think, who would you like your kid to emulate? Kaepernick or Tebow? It's interesting. I just saw somebody was saying Kaepernick is like Muhammad Ali or Martin Luther King, stirring up discussion. Stir up discussion all you want. Tim Tebow stirs up discussion. He talks about doing good works, good stuff. And I just hope that this Dave Eccles, this whole situation backfires on him. The fact is, it says he was forced to apologize. That's a bad sign when you're forced to apologize. How good is an apology when somebody holds a gun to your head? But he was forced to apologize, thinking he was really going to really generate a lot of excitement, and the public was just going to rah of making fun and shaming and disrespecting a guy that really has never done one thing wrong other than try to earn a place on a sports team and try to use his money to bless other people. You know, in this country, if you're selfish and you're rude and you're filthy mouth, you get applause. And if you're kind and you're generous, then there's got to be something wrong with you. You got to have another motive for doing your kindness and being generous, right? There's got to be another motive, because people judge you with the funky heart that they have. Well, almost every week you can read about a professor at a university in this country. It's amazing to me. You remember the universities? You ever studied much of U.S. history? And most universities were started by churches to train ministers, because the churches were actually the moral backbone or the moral plumb line of the country when it started. And they thought, hey, this is a government that's going to be a republic, but if people don't self-discipline and manage their own gnarly behaviors, there isn't enough military and cops we can put out the street to keep this thing together. So people need to decide what good looks like and then be good. Because if enough people aren't good, pretty soon they're in enough prisons and jails, and pretty soon it's called anarchy is what it's called. So it's fascinating to me that these places where they used to train leaders, spiritual leaders, now have these anarchists as professors. And at Trinity College, Professor Johnny Eric Williams, you can do one of these a week. These guys are nutso. And we're actually paying these colleges $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $30, $35, $40, $45, $50,000 a year to send our vulnerable young people to. And then they end up in a class with Johnny Williams. And Johnny Williams, on his June 18th Facebook post, suggested that first responders to the shooting of the Congress, the conservative congressman practicing baseball to play against the Democrats, that the first responders to that shooting should have let the wounded individuals die. Is this twisted or what? This is the same kind of spirit that Mr. Eccles with the River Dogs had to malign Mr. Tebow. It's past time, it says on this site, it's past time for the racially oppressed to do what people who believe themselves to be white will not do. Put an end to the vectors of their destructive mythology of whiteness and their white supremacy system. And the hashtag was, let them effing die. Williams is an associate professor of sociology at Trinity College. There's a lot of Trinities. I don't know whether this is the one down in Florida. It doesn't say here where this college is located. In another post, Williams wrote that he is fed the F up with self-identified whites, daily violence directed at immigrants, Muslims, and sexually and racially oppressed people. He added that the time is now to confront these inhuman a-holes and end this now. I want to, if this guy's willing to say this on Facebook, what do you think he's willing to say in a classroom with the door locked and the air conditioning on, with a classroom full of students, when he could just say whatever he pleases because they got free speech on campuses as long as you say the right thing, the left agenda? Williams also shared another post that he probably didn't write, but he shared it on his Facebook, called "Let Them Effing Die," which argued that the first responders to the congressional shooting should have let Representatives Scalise and others die. The inflammatory post called on minorities to refuse assistance to white people in potentially fatal situations like choking at a restaurant, bleeding, or drowning. Like, is that person drowning over there? Wait a minute. Wait. Oh, yeah, we need to help him. Oh, wait a minute. He's white. Forget about it. The post then calls for those persons to not only watch as others die, but to smile as they watch, for letting them die is a great service to the universe. Now, you know something? I think it's fine that he has this perspective. I feel bad for him. He can't be a very happy person. But to hire this guy to teach students sociology, now, I studied sociology, and I should have got a degree in it if I wouldn't have quit. Doggone it. I got more units than I need, but they won't give me my degree anymore because they changed it. That said, I like taking sociology courses. I was fascinated by the topic and the studies they did. But I wouldn't be happy with this gentleman, Mr. Williams. It goes on to say, if you see them drowning, if you see them in a burning building, if they're bleeding out in an emergency room, if the ground is crumbling beneath them, if they're in a park and they turn their weapons on each other, do nothing. Let them effing die. And smile a bit when you do that, the anonymous author wrote on Williams' Facebook page. So generally, I don't really post much on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. But if I put something on there, I believe in it. I don't put something on there I don't believe or is offensive. So I trust that Mr. Williams liked that and put it on there. So at this point, it's unclear whether the Trinity College gives a rip about what Williams does. He just launched his little trip there, and there you have it. So pretty interesting. Now, this is interesting. We have up in our area here, we have conservatives that are representatives. They claimed it. Well, they're Republicans. Like, I always have a tough time anymore. It's like the term Christian. It's kind of a beat up word, and it's kind of a bad overused word that really, it's confusing when you use the term Christian. It's the same way when you use the word Republican, because that used to have meaning, but it doesn't anymore. So we have a Republican assemblyman named James Gallagher, and we have a Republican senator named Jim Nielsen. And we have a Republican congressman, for those of you up in Butte County and to the north, named Doug LaMalfa. And Yuba Sutter has a Republican Democrat congressman that actually is about as conservative as these Republicans claim to be, although he's not conservative at all, named John Garamendi. So these guys are representing us, two of them, Nielsen and Gallagher, in Sacramento, and then we have LaMalfa in Washington, D.C., and all of them claim at different times to be pro-life. Now, this is interesting. California, you know that Obamacare they're working on Obamacare to overhaul it. And there's been some talk, and I thought they would have withdrawn funds from Planned Parenthood already, but they haven't done that at the national level. Some states have, like Texas. But California, because they haven't broken off from the union, but essentially they're breaking off from any compliance with the union. I'm talking about the United States of America union. So California plans to set aside $20 million for hundreds of Planned Parenthood clinics and other named clinics throughout the state. It's called the Community Clinic Lifeline Grant Program. Remember I told you about Mr. and Mrs. Grant? There's taxes that pay stuff for you, pay for things like fire and police, etc. And then there's grants. So the grants are one of the most wealthy families in the United States. There's grants for this and grants for that. So this is the Community Clinic Lifeline Grant Program, which allows Planned Parenthood clinics and other small health facilities that do abortions to remain in business should Republicans succeed in repealing Obamacare and defunding the abortion providers, because part of the changes to Obamacare would be an elimination of all this abortion stuff. So this was a press release from the state treasurer's office. This isn't just about Governor Brown. This is about John Chang, the treasurer's office, all these people raising a big stink about this. And so they're going to set aside our taxpayer money. You didn't get asked, did you? It didn't go on the ballot, and it didn't even go before the legislature. This is Governor Brown just saying this is what we're going to do. It reminds you of President Obama, doesn't it? He just decides, I'm not going to put this to a vote. I can do this as an executive call. So it says here that the Republicans, their desire is to defund Planned Parenthood and redirect those funds to community health care clinics that actually do health care, not abortions, and provide more comprehensive services like mammograms, cancer screening, all that kind of stuff that Planned Parenthood claimed they did, but they never did. So there's a list of alternatives to Planned Parenthood clinics in any region of the United States if you go to getyourcare.org, Get Your Care. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just telling you that it's there. Now, it's interesting that Planned Parenthood is operating at a huge profit. Now, they make money. They don't give away abortions for free or all these services for free. They charge. But they also get hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayers. I'll give you an example. This year, I guess they're talking about 2017, the organization shows an increase in government reimbursement and grants this year, reporting $554.6 million in taxpayer funding. So that means that's money that's taken out of your hard-earned dollars and given to abort babies. Now, in 2015 and 16, Planned Parenthood reported performing 348 abortions, an increase of 4,349 abortions over the previous year. Now, when you ask them how many people did you refer for adoptions, usually it's just a fistful. It's a handful. So the move in California will allow licensed nonprofit clinics that are involved in abortion stuff in underserved areas that are at risk of cutting services to the actual federal government to be eligible for a one-time grant of $250,000. So if you're a conservative and you live in the state of California and you're happy about what Trump is doing, basically you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay to work against the guy you voted for president. So as he cuts costs to Planned Parenthood, they're going to take money out of your pocket to reimburse Planned Parenthood from the money that the federal government is not giving them. Isn't that amazing? That's what's happening. And I'm interested to see whether our representatives, Gallagher and Nielsen, are going to do any more, whether they'll even vote against this or stand up and make a public statement about this that they're forcing. It's just, they're just calling the shot. They're not even given, like, we don't have any representation up in the north anyway, compared to LA and stuff. We're unfairly represented, but they're not even given a chance of those representatives to make a statement regarding giving $20 million to Planned Parenthood and other type clinics that do abortions if they lose federal funding. So, I don't know. Have you noticed, did you notice that this Otto Warmbier or Buyer, W-A-R-M, Warm, B-I-E-R, Warmbier, Otto Warmbier. Did you notice Otto Warmbier? He was a university graduate, very smart guy, really nice guy from everybody that knew him. He went on one of these tourist trips to North Korea. Some of you didn't think you could go to North Korea, but my goddaughter actually took one as well. And they toured North Korea. But when Otto Warmbier was there, he took one of these groups. He was 22. When he went, he was probably 20 or 21. He went to North Korea on one of these tours, and he was arrested and accused while there of removing a poster or a banner that was a propaganda banner for North Korea. And he was going to bring it home as a souvenir, right? And probably a lot of you have done stuff like that. You've taken home some kind of a souvenir. You didn't really pay for it, but it was just something you found somewhere on a trip and thought, this is cool. This will remind me of the trip. People will see this and love it, da-da-da-da. So this was either a paper poster or a vinyl poster or something, and it was basically touting the wonderful world of North Korea. Now, I'm familiar with North Korea because, like I said, my goddaughter traveled there. And also, my friend Mark Ulbrich, he just died here several months ago of cancer. But I met him in Beijing when he was Bible smuggling to the underground church in China, and he was helping our team. And so we stayed in contact over the years, over the last 20 years, and he was doing work in and out of North Korea, helping the underground church in North Korea. And if you don't know much about North Korea, there are some, I was going to give you the title of a book, and I forgot to write it down, but I've read a number of books from people that are written by people that have escaped from North Korea. And usually they escape not into South Korea, but they go across the river into China, and then they work their way out of China and get either to South Korea that way or to America. And so when I saw, there's been numbers of people that have been held hostage over there, people that are 70, 80 years of age. They just arrested a guy or two that teaches in a college over there, a university that was set up by Christians. And these guys are Christian people, and they were arrested and charged with espionage. Usually the charge sounds like they say espionage, so it sounds like some kind of political thing, but really what they're talking about is maybe they're Christians and they talked to somebody about Jesus, or they gave somebody a Bible. In the case of Otto Warmbier, who is Jewish, he wasn't doing anything like that, but he decided to take something. And so they held him hostage, and recently they returned him. All during the Obama administration did not make any public effort to get him out. I don't know whether they did anything beside the scenes. His family, the Warmbier family, said the Obamas just told him to keep quiet and don't do anything. They would do something. So finally, when Trump comes to power, Warmbier is packaged and put on an airplane and sent back to the United States, and he dies in a U.S. hospital. They say, well, he had botulism or had some kind of bacterial infection He didn't have anything. What he had was trauma to the head, and he died. Now, the reason I bring him up, I'm bringing him up in the spirit of Professor Williams, who said that the emergency responders did a disservice to the United States by rescuing those that were shot at the congressional baseball game. And then in the spirit of the hate-filled maneuvers and comments about Tim Tebow by Eccles and the River Dogs in Charlotte, embarrassed entire South and their Southern hospitality, which Tebow was raised down there and as well, went to school down there at Florida. There is a real hatred in this country, and it's the liberals cannot win the intellectual arguments, so they end up calling people names. And they're hateful. And they wish people would get hit by a truck, or their head would get cut off, or they get shot. And so it's interesting, under the Obama administration, somebody mentioned my name, that I was interested in killing President Obama, that they said I'd actually written a letter to the White House, which nobody ever produced, but they came and investigated me twice and interviewed me. But literally, there's been tens of thousands of public saying, I hope he dies. I want him to die. I'm going to finish this in just a second. We need to go to a break, they say. So hang on to this. I'm going to talk about Otto Warmbier.
You are totally free to express your political views. No one is going to tell you what you can say or how you can say it, right? But what if you thought you'd be audited by the IRS, or have your business boycotted, or even lose your job? Would you speak freely then? This isn't a hypothetical question. It's happening to Americans right now. It's what I call the intimidation game. The object of this very real game is to make political opponents pay a high price for expressing their opinions. It was a standard technique in the Jim Crow South in the 1950s. It was used by racist Southern Democrats to shut up black civil rights groups like the NAACP. And now these tactics have been revived and improved upon by today's Democratic Party and their allies on the progressive left. They want to shut up conservatives, just like racists once wanted to shut up blacks and their liberal supporters. They do it in three ways. First, they harass. Second, they investigate and prosecute. And third, they blackmail. Tactic number one, harass. They sic federal and state agencies and bureaucrats on their political enemies. Remember the IRS targeting scandal that began in 2010? That's when the IRS systematically denied or delayed nonprofit status to more than 400 citizen activist groups, almost all conservative. These groups, representing tens of thousands of Americans, clearly met the IRS's tax-exempt standards. But the IRS delay and denial made it impossible for these groups to raise or spend money during the 2012 presidential election. Had they been able to, would the election have turned out differently? We'll never know. Some of these groups are still waiting for their nonprofit approval. Democrats continue to claim the scandal was the result of some rogue IRS agents who didn't understand the law. Not true. We know from documents obtained through congressional investigations and the Freedom of Information Act that the IRS was taking its cue from powerful Democrats and their left-wing allies, like MoveOn.org. For example, Michigan Senator Carl Levin repeatedly pressured the agency to investigate conservative nonprofits. Meanwhile, in speeches, President Barack Obama warned about shadowy Tea Party groups. Lois Lerner, the head of the IRS's nonprofit division and a Democratic Party loyalist, took the hint. Tactic number two, investigate and prosecute. In Wisconsin, Democrat prosecutors engaged in a bogus campaign finance investigation into conservative groups that had supported Wisconsin's Republican governor, Scott Walker. The prosecutors subpoenaed emails and financial records of the groups and its employees. They staged pre-dawn raids on the homes of Wisconsin conservatives, confiscating computers and correspondence. Then, They warned the victims of these phony investigations and terrorizing raids that they'd go to jail if they told anyone what was happening to them. It took the state Supreme Court to end this use of the government to suppress political opponents. But the message was sent by Democrats in Wisconsin. Cross us, and you will pay a steep price. Tactic number 3, blackmail. The American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, is a nonprofit that is very good at getting free market legislation passed at the state level. It's supported by a number of corporate donors, Coca-Cola and Kraft once among them. In 2012, left-wing groups who have long hated ALEC had an idea. Target ALEC's corporate donors, threaten to run ads branding them as racists or climate deniers unless they pull their support. It worked. More than 100 major donors ended their funding. As if these 3 tactics weren't bad enough, the left has added a new weapon to its intimidation arsenal: forced disclosure of political donors. This is when the names of people who give money to a cause or a candidate are made public. Disclosure can be good when it lets citizens keep track of whose money may be influencing politicians, but it's bad when it's used to target and punish average Americans who make political donations. Left-wing activists in California used financial disclosure records to assemble a searchable map of every person who donated to California's Prop 8 campaign supporting traditional marriage. The donors on that list had their cars keyed, their windows broken, and their businesses flash mobbed. Some Prop 8 supporters even lost their jobs, most notably the CEO of Mozilla Firefox, Brendan Eich. So, how do we stop this intimidation? First, learn to recognize the left's bully tactics. They're not subtle. Second, be very wary of initiatives to increase financial disclosure. They sound good, but they're almost always just left-wing attempts to get new names of people to intimidate. And finally, we must fight back. They can only win if we let them. We can't let them. Our freedom depends on it. I'm Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal for Prager University.
All right, welcome back. This is Lou Benninger, and we're here at the Patriot, 1410 AM and 104.3 FM. And we're wrapping up the show today. And again, I'll mention, if you just lit with us and got on with us right now, we're pre-recording this show because we can't be here Saturday. Normally we're live where you can call in and have a chat, but today we're out and about, and it is smoking hot. Probably hot where you are as well. So I was just talking about the very tragic loss of a young, bright college student, college graduate, Otto Warmbier, and who I believe that the Obama administration let languish in North Korea, and who Trump made a real effort to get him out of there. But by the time they got him out, he had been beaten up so badly that he died from his injuries once back in the United States. Now, the interesting thing is that the same kind of hatred and bitterness that was spewed towards Trump, killing all the conservatives, Scalise, and anybody else, is also being spewed about Otto Warmbier. And for instance, when Otto Warmbier was arrested and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in North Korea for allegedly attempting to steal a propaganda poster, Huffington Post ran an article claiming North Korea proves that white male privilege is not universal. Amazing. White male privilege. He was just a kid that wanted to see a bit of the world after college. And of all the 220-something nations, he chose to go see North Korea, and they mock him for doing that. Just like they mock Tebow, they mock Trump, they mock Ben Carson, they mocked Colonel West. On and on and on and on and on it goes. White privilege had nothing to do with his arrest, his severe punishment, or his eventual death. They'd kill a black person just the same. Communism has been killing people in the tens of millions of all races or ethnicities, I would say, since its inception in the early 20th century, be the 1900s, early 1900s, right, when it started in Russia. You look at Cambodia, you look at Laos, you look at Vietnam, African countries, you look at Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc countries, Eastern Germany, murder, kill, torture, abuse, harvest people's organs that are incarcerated. It's unbelievable. But people in the United States seem to have a veil over their eyes. So I assumed that Warmbier actually wanted the poster. I could see him wanting that poster. But this article says that there's no evidence that Warmbier even took the poster, other than making a forced confession. But the article in the Huffington Post says they assume his guilt anyway, and that Warmbier was driven to do it by an unfortunate side effect of being raised as a white child and a white man in the United States. And this writer says in his diatribe against him, claims all systems in the United States, including the economic, academic, and legal systems, operate with the implicit purpose to make certain that white men are the only racial group that benefit from this privilege. The Salon magazine ran a headline referring to Warmbier as America's biggest idiot frat boy. But after his death, they pulled the article. Maybe they had some sense of decorum after all. Maybe their conscience actually bothered them. He was called a frat bro. In other words, if you go to college and you're white and you're in a fraternity, that's everything that's wrong with America. They even mocked his name, describing him as Warm Beer instead of Warmbier. And it's sad, just sad. It's embarrassing to be, I do a class at the Yuba County Jail, and there's people from all over the world there. And anybody can attend it out of this pod, which is people, like I mentioned, from all over. And the one common denominator about all these people is they want to come to America. And it's amazing how so many people that are in America, benefiting by America, hate America, and want to dissolve America. Yet all the people at the Yuba County Jail I talked to would love to be a citizen and live in America. And they're hoping that the immigration judge will permit that to happen. It's so different. And I tell them sometimes I'm embarrassed to be an American because I get associated with idiots like write this article about and mock a college student, no matter what their ethnicity is. They claim, we're sensitive to ethnic people. You're only sensitive to people other than white people. You're racist. That's what you are. You're racist against white people. And that's what's going on in this country. And it's embarrassing to be identified with America when we had this kind of deviancy in the country. It's just a tragic deal. I know we're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. We're on our last half hour, but I got to talk about this guy who I just ran onto, and I guess he's been around for a while. He was a Marine and he was an artillery man, and he now is I don't have a television, so some things I just miss. But this guy is referred to as Sabo. And you remember when Obama became president and there was all this cool artwork? Remember the artwork of him in multicolor poster, a headshot of him, and it said hope over the top of it. And you found these posters and it was reproduced all over the place. It was kind of a new age art look. Kind of cool. And now we got it. And most of the artwork like that of propaganda art is all on the left, right? Hate America, Che Guevara, hey, Viva Cuba, the Castros, Chavez, all this stuff, Chavez from Venus, it's all pro-socialism, pro-communism, down with America, and it's all left stuff. But now there's a guy on the right, and he calls himself Sabo. He's a former U.S. Marine who works from an apartment/studio in L.A. beneath a sign that says F-U-C-K Tibet, and another that says F-U-C-K Peace, P-E-A-C-A. He was a former operator of a tank, and he's sick. He's sick of the same stuff I'm sick of. So where we've had a guy named Banksy who targets capitalism, consumerism, and inequality, and Black Larat, Black Larat is the father of stencil graffiti and depicts oppression and resistance. And Shepard Fairey, he's the one who came up with the Barack Obama Hope poster, became internationally famous. Now we have Sabo. And so around L.A., there's these photographs of Donald Trump in big posters showing up all over the place, even shows Trump flipping people off. And so this guy has got an axe to grind with the left. Obviously cut his teeth in danger in the military, serving overseas. And he's been very poor for years, but in the last number of years, particularly since Trump got involved and there's just been this move to elect conservative candidates, he's actually making some, usually he was just like doing paraphernalia and T-shirts and he was doing graffiti. You know, we paint out graffiti here locally, and most of it is by liberals. They're gangbangers, people that want to break the law, norteños, sereños, and people want to say filthy things on the side of freeways. And so he highlights pot-smoking, lazy bums who are hostile to Western values. He puts the same. You can look him up. He's got a website. I can't quote the website, but I think if you just Google Sabo, S-A-B-O, you're going to find his stuff. He does like a thing like Planned Parenthood logo and put Planned Parenthood, we've killed more blacks than the Klan, things like that. Or slogan, instead of Black Lives Matter, he just says Black lives are just matter. That's all they are. They're just matter. So he's appeared on all these kinds of shows, Fox News, Breitbart, The Blaze, and other media outlet, and no longer, they say, is he struggling to pay rent or buy a burger. He's now got a new $7,000 industrial-sized printer where he can print his own posters in his apartment. It reminds me of a guy who used to be located at 5th and D Street in Marysville. And we were looking for who was doing this, but he used to paint crank, the term crank, all over Marysville and Yuba City. Way up high. He'd get way up high. And the guy was a double amputee. He had some prosthetics on, but he just got, some people like to drink a highball to get high or smoke some weed. This guy gets high on tagging. And one day they Marysville police tracked Crank down through Facebook and arrested him and sent him to prison. They sent him to prison for tagging. But you notice most of the tagging is by liberals, but Sabo has got it going on. So he put up a billboard that says Black lives are just matter, and another one that said, I love this one, Planned Parenthood logo and abortion-themed punchline, we've killed more blacks than the Klan. Sabo, check him out, and maybe you want to buy some of his paraphernalia, a T-shirt by him or something like that. Sabo, he's making some money finally with Donald Trump in the White House. In fact, he wasn't even a Trump supporter. He's the one who came up and created, I don't know whether you saw the Ted Cruz photo with him all tatted up like a gangster. And Cruz really liked it because it made him look tough. I think Sabo might have been a Cruz advocate and was against Donald until he saw that Donald could kick some liberals' butt, and then he liked him. So anyway, if you have a chance to check him out, I'm going to go check it out. I might buy something from him just to support him. Said he grew up in Texas and he operated tanks in the Marines before studying art in L.A. Then he drifted into street art in the 1990s. He said, I became disgusted with liberals after they circled the wagons to defend Bill Clinton from rape allegations. It's interesting what triggers someone to start something in their life. He also believes that Obama is a Muslim and the Democrats literally worship the devil and they run pedophile rings. And I think there's some evidence for all that, but nobody really wants to go there. Let me remind you of something weird that happened. Do you remember that when Weiner got caught sending texts of his private parts to women? And then Uma Abedin, she was working for Hillary Clinton. Then we got into this whole email scandal. And finally, Weiner kind of reconciled with his wife, but then they caught him texting again. And so the FBI went in and they confiscated Weiner's computer. And when they looked on it for evidence to prove his latest crimes, basically pedophile type crimes, sex crimes, they found all kinds of stuff on that computer that were violations of the government secrecy laws with Hillary Clinton, and they ran onto so much stuff, and I believe they ran onto pedophilia stuff that the Democrats are involved in, like the pedestras, that the New York City Police Department was ready to go and start arresting people. I mean, they had these people, they had all the evidence. But higher echelon government stopped the police department, the FBI stopped the police department and said, we got this. Now, when you think of Jim Comey, the director of the FBI, that Jim Comey has been running interference for the Democrats. Instead of being a nonpartisan and upholding the law, remember the blind lady with the lady with blindfolded lady with the scales? My dad had scales. He was a butcher. And he told me one time, he said, Lou, people cheat people by putting their thumb on the scale and showing that the meat weighed more than it does. And so the customer can see what the weight is on the other side. And then they agree to that. Oh yeah, that's enough. That's. And so you sell them less meat than you claimed you did. And you rip people off that way. That's how you cheat people. Well, the lady with the set of scales and is blind means that we're going to operate fairly and with integrity. And so, in this case, Jim Comey has blocked investigations that would have jeopardized the very top people in the Democrat machine in the United States of America. People that have been involved in a network of pedophilia around the world, and where they, for instance, Uma Abedin was sending off this computer or to this computer that was confiscated from Weiner. Hillary Clinton was sending emails that she wanted Uma Abedin to copy for her or to print out for her and then turn into her. I do that all the time with people I work with at Glad Tidings. I'll send them information and say, will you print all this out for me? We send stuff back and forth all the time where I need a certain amount of copies for the jail or whatever. And so Hillary Clinton was sending stuff to Weiner's computer, who he shouldn't even have had ability to look at, but Uma Abedin would have him print stuff out for her. Well, there was also stuff that was criminal in nature that the New York City Police Department wanted to arrest but was told to stand down. This is all in national newspapers. By the FBI. That would be the Comey FBI, who now is trying to accuse Trump of all kinds of wrongdoing. Isn't it amazing how these things work? So we're coming down to the last part of this. We have 4 minutes, so I'm just looking at what I'm going to focus on for just a second here. Oh, I want to go back to this. I have had all kinds of people talk to me about my comments about why we have to feed all the children in the community and pay for it by our tax dollars. And on June 2nd, in the Appeal Democrat, it said, free food for use in summer. Thousands of meals, breakfasts, or lunches will be provided by the Summer Food Service Program. I thought, where did this come from? So I looked it up. And the federal government, Barack Obama, you know, he doubled the amount of food stamp recipients. It's not because people starved to death. It's just because he wanted to just make them vote for him next time, right? Or the next Democrat person. So you just give them free food. So now you don't even have to deserve anything. You can just show up at all these places, and people like Amy Watson of Marysville Joint Unified, and over here at Yuba City, Karen Lano of Student Nutrition. She's a supervisor over at Yuba City. And they said they served, they're serving all kinds of kids, and they're going to do it this summer. So there's all kinds of locations that they're going to give free food to. Now, the reason this is so fascinating to me is I once was a kid, and I once ate food. And my mother made it. I had a real unusual situation in my home. We brought food into the house, and then we made meals, and we fed whoever was in the house. And when I went to school, I actually purchased a lunch, and that was it. We purchased a lunch. And I'd never heard of such a thing as where I didn't know anybody in my school or in my neighborhood that didn't either have a sack lunch or took their lunch pail or bought a hot lunch at the school. People just had lunch. And families, this is kind of an amazing thing. It was about the time when the dinosaurs were still alive up in Browns Valley. People would bring home food and make a meal, and they'd actually eat it together. It was kind of, it's hard to believe today. And they didn't need EBT cards, and they didn't need food stamps or WIC, where you end up deciding to have a child or having sex and then get shocked by the fact of now your stomach's getting bigger and your midsection's expanding and you're going to have a baby, and you think, how did this happen? Just a shock. And then you're so shocked by the fact you were having sex over and over, and then you got pregnant, and then you realize that once the child is born, that you actually have to feed this child, and you have no idea how to feed this child or where you're going to get the food. So who do you go to? Well, of course, you go to the government, because the government is the source of all things. In fact, we talked about it last week. All this week, as I sweated, I was thinking about the health officer in Yuba County and the information officer in Sutter County explaining that water on my forehead is sweat. It isn't somebody's urine. It isn't a golden shower. It isn't raining out. It's sunny, but it's sweat. And that could be a good or a bad thing, and I need to pour some water on my face.